So I'm Jenny Johnston, founder of Quantum EFT, and I'm here with Dr. John Ryan, founder of, you can say what you're founder of, John. I'd love you to introduce yourself.
Okay, Jenny. So I'm the founder of Unity Field Healing. So I have been working in the domain of energy medicine for quite some time. And I began to have visionary experiences, I guess is really the only way to describe it, that began to teach me about working in the quantum space of the DNA. And so Unity Field Healing is a modality that emerged from those visions and from the teaching that I was given in that space. And so it's become a quite a well-known program at this point. There's about 500 practitioners now all around the world doing magnificent healing work for people and for humanity as a whole. So, yeah.
Mm. And I know that we connected, or our lives came together through Cryon when Cryon, Lee Carroll, who channels Cryon, was bringing Friends of Cryon's books out together, and your first book, I think it was your first book, The
Yeah,
Missing Pill,
that's right.
and my first book, Tapping into Past Lives, were both featured together.
That's
And
right.
that's when I first read your book, and
Our first convergence.
yeah, exactly. And I love that you're working with quantum DNA and I'm working with quantum DNA, but coming from different perspectives to have the same intention
Yeah.
of helping people using all of
Yeah, it's
their.
a magnificent time because we're being given so many tools to work with, so many gifts and tools to work with to help evolve the energy and to help humanity in different ways integrate grace. Really, it's the healing of deep issues and energetic experiences that keep us all limited and restricted in different ways. But the we're being given now knowledge how to release a lot of this in very simple ways that were would be considered mysterious or strange, I guess, even not too long ago. But
Mm,
people have become very familiar now with energy processes and working with the soul energy as well as the energy fields of the human body. And
mm,
so, as we mature in that space, we're being given new tools to work with, kind of advanced tools, really, to work in a deeper quantum space to really help people release energies that have been keeping them restricted in different ways.
mm. And I love that you're working with quantum DNA and, well, give us the background of how you use quantum EFT. Oh, quantum DNA. I use quantum EFT. You use quantum DNA,
Yeah,
as
that's
do
right. I'm going to ask you that question, so you stay tuned.
I.
So what happened for me, Jenny, was I just briefly, I going back in my life a little bit, I'm a physician, a medical doctor, I'm a specialist in diagnostic imaging and a professor in medicine at the university. And so as I was finishing my medical training around 1987, which your audience may recognize a date of the harmonic convergence, some people will be familiar with that. It was I began to have really strange experiences, really inexplicable experiences. I'd be going to bed at night and I'd be seeing lights and visions. I would pop out of my body and have out of body experiences. I'd be standing having a conversation with someone, and this auric field would kind of light up around them. And I thought something was wrong with me, to be honest. At the time, I had no idea what I was living, I had no frame of understanding the experience. But I had an incredible intuition one morning that I simply had to go to a bookstore. And it was a bookstore I'd never been to. It was kind of a new age bookstore, but there really wasn't a lot of new age stuff back in 1987. It
Mm,
was a pretty small
yes.
offering compared to today. But I did go, and it was a bookstore mostly about Eastern spirituality and yoga and a little bit about crystals and things like that. And I walked in the store and I thought, I will never find what I came here for. Like, this is just daunting. And as my eyes panned through the bookstore, there was a book on a shelf that literally magnified. You know, today when you run
Mm,
your mouse over an icon on your computer, it gets
mm-hmm,
big. The book
mm,
actually magnified on the shelf. And I went over and took it down and started to read it. And the name of the book was called The Spontaneous Awakening of Kundalini.
Mm.
And so it began to help me understand or give me a frame of reference for what I was living at the time. And
Yes.
so it produced some answers, a lot more questions than answers, but it certainly sent me on a path. And I started to integrate the experience I was living. And I began to understand things I knew as a child. I began having memories of things I knew when I was a little boy. And this awareness that the earth is poised to undergo a big transformation, which today we call the ascension process. But I started having memories of knowing this was going to happen. And I realized this was why I was living these experiences that I was living. And so one thing led to another. I began exploring Eastern healing, Chinese medicine, Tibetan healing, you name it, all the various holistic forms of healing. And I began to have really deep meditative experiences. And I began at times, mostly when I would be with a really big group of consciously evolving people in some kind of a special place on the planet, like Arkansas
Mm-hmm.
or Hawaii or these kinds of places.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have these really powerful visions that began to teach me about the 24th chromosome. Now, I didn't recognize it as that when I first saw it. I was shown an evolution of how this is a structure that's attached to us. And in the process we're living, what we call the ascension, this little, what was once a filament, almost like a chain, a little tiny double helix chain, is expanding in really profound ways. And it's opening a field of energy and information to which we're connected. And it's actually kind of the portal, the access through which a human being
Mm-hmm.
goes into spiritual dimensions. And so they began to show me the structure, the nature, how we program information when we're going to be born into a body, all this kind of stuff, and how we can work with a light template within that space to bring healing or recalibration, kind of bring in energetic transformation to open up our communication with this space. And that's kind of the foundation of unity field healing. That's really what's happening in the process. And so from that, I was kind of shown steps to create it in a modality kind of a way. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole story, of course, as to how that evolved. It didn't happen in an afternoon. It happened over a couple of
Yes.
years. But as the information became clear, I realized it was a healing modality or potential
Mm-hmm.
for a modality to work in the space. And I began working with people, and people were having really profound experiences. And then eventually I was given this inner prompt to start initiating practitioners so that other people could do the work. And then most recently, just this year, the first class of teachers was initiated.
Mm-hmm.
So people can teach and initiate other practitioners as well. So it's kind of
Yeah.
a beautiful evolution of the work. It's been very organic, very natural, how it's kind of all unfolded. That's the way I like to do things. And
Mm-hmm.
so
I agree.
that's kind of how it all happened. Yeah.
Mm. I love the visions that you give of how it's unfolding, whereas I work with quantum DNA in a different way through the meridians and through tapping on the
Right.
meridians.
Tell me about
Um,
that. I'm very curious to
yeah,
hear about your work.
yeah. So my background also is from a health medical sort of field, but not a doctor. I was an occupational therapist for over 30 years. And during that time, I did a lot of relaxation therapy with clients with high stress levels. Um, and then I started working also with veterans. I had my own business working with veterans. And I found that my domiciliary work, taking out equipment, etc., had my back collapse, and
Okay.
I was off work and had spinal surgery. And it was during that time that I decided to learn hypnotherapy. So I
Okay.
became a clinical hypnotherapist. And from clinical hypnotherapy, I went on and did past life regression
Okay.
hypnotherapy.
Okay.
Now, also before that happened, my mother died suddenly, just out of the blue. Somebody who shouldn't have been driving put their foot on the accelerator, and
Mm,
a couple of weeks later, my mother had a blood clot that went the blood supply of the heart, so it just stopped.
Mm.
Now, when this happened so suddenly, I started reading books about near-death experiences.
Mm.
Um, I started, from a background, a Methodist or Uniting Church background, I started getting into the spirituality. And a lot of synchronistic events occurred, of course. And that's when I met somebody. My marriage fell apart. I met somebody, and I'd been with my husband since I was 15. So I didn't expect to meet somebody and have an instant connection, but I did. And although we were only together for 3 months, we actually did past life regressions together. And I found that he was my husband in a past life in the American Civil War. And he promised, he went away to war, but he promised he'd come back. And it was this soul promise. Of course, he died in the war. It was this soul promise that brought him back to me in this life. But
Wow.
he said to me, I'm only here for a short time. And so he was only here for a short time. But that had me look into soul promises, soul agreements, soul contracts. And synchronistically, in my work as an occupational therapist, somebody came and lent me 2 Cryon books. And she
Okay.
was only there for 2 weeks. And that's how I was introduced to Cryon. So Cryon was brought to me. And then with all the Cryon information, and Lee Carroll channels Cryon, and I know you know Lee Carroll, but he also talks about the multidimensional DNA or the quantum DNA and the 24th chromosome, and how we should speak to our DNA
Yeah.
and claim our power as beings of light with full free choice. And it was all the teachings of Cryon, which is, of course, spiritual truth, that was coming to me, and with my knowledge of relaxation therapy and then past life regression. And also Cryon talks about the magnetics of the body, and of course the electromagnetics of the body runs through the meridians. And
Mhm.
so I thought, what better way to combine it all? And so I work mostly with EFT practitioners who then want to go on and expand their EFT practice, because EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Techniques, and its
Mhm.
common name is tapping. So we
Mhm.
use these meridian points to release trauma in this life, but Quantum EFT looks at, well, what's going on at a soul level? What are our soul contracts, agreements, our soul planning meetings? Um, how do we take responsibility for what's going on in our life at a soul level?
Mhm.
And we release it back to its origins. So we also do um, working with our quantum DNA or our multidimensional DNA that Cryon says, scientists used to call it junk DNA. And that it was that 97% DNA that is not our three-dimensional genomes that is giving instructions to our current DNA. And so we're working mostly with our multidimensional or quantum DNA that I know is also held in a quantum state with the 24th chromosome. So a lot of it is releasing traumas or negative patterns that are occurring in this lifetime, but looking at it at a soul level and releasing it all the way back to where it began through all of our past lives, even planetary lives we go to. And then we also do what Cryon calls mining the Akash,
Mhm.
where once we've cleared things, also ancestrally, so not just back in our soul lifetimes, but also through our ancestors, because we know we contain our ancestral DNA in our current DNA at least 3 generations, maybe even 12. And so we clear those patterns in all directions, basically. And then we mine the Akash by going into our personal Akash our personal lifetimes and bringing back the gold. So the experiences that we want. So if people say, well, I'd really like to be a writer in this lifetime. And so they go back and experience a lifetime where they were a writer, not just have a reader tell them they were a writer, but have them experience that. And
Right.
then we come back and we tap it back in from the
Okay.
multidimensional DNA. We tap it in through the meridian points into our current DNA.
Okay.
And then we have it speak to the blueprint of the stem cells. And then we
Beautiful.
take it
Beautiful.
out into the future to experience what that feels like in our future.
Okay.
And then we come back to our present self, and speaking out loud, knowing that we will have a magnetic pull, and a sense of deja vu when we get there, having already imprinted our energy out there
Right.
in the future. And so, yeah, it's very similar,
Hmm.
that we have the same intentions for humanity, because we're both working with our quantum DNA, which a lot of modalities don't look at. They're
Yeah.
just looking at our physical current DNA, and even your your profession that you chose in this lifetime of being a radiologist. It's like looking at more than what you see in the body with your eyes, right?
It's true. In fact, the whole facet of medicine is all based on energetic imaging, right? Because
Mm,
it's either X-rays or sound waves or magnetic waves that are,
yes,
introduced into the body and then return as images. They return as signals that are turned into images. So I always
yeah.
tease people in the domain who think I'm a little, too
Hmm.
open-minded. And I'll say, well, you're actually working in energy too. You just don't actually realize it yet.
Yeah. And I think what we've come across with people that are drawn to this sort of work that both you and I do is that they're more and more stepping into the light and saying, hey, yeah, I believe in this woo-woo stuff that's, people used to call it very woo-woo, where now it's more as taken as, well, this is reality. This is our reality.
Yeah. And I think so much is happening on the planet, Jenny. Like,
Mm,
we've gone through so much. There was a whole period of time, I think, when there were souls that were cued to awaken. It was like kind of written into our soul contract that we'd be going through these
mm,
experiences. Some people will say to me, have you always been spiritual, or, were you a seeker? And I always say, I always had a profound morality. Like I was always a person who believed in truth and integrity and in, the virtues basically. But I wasn't really a spiritual or a religious person. I grew up in a religion, like Catholicism. My family was Catholic, but we weren't really hyper religious or anything.
mm,
And I was not a seeker. Like I was really in a scientific world, minding my own business, doing my own thing. And
mhm,
then boom,
mhm,
and the magic of that is that it helped me realize that there's a plan. There's something so much bigger than any one of us that's
mm,
guiding this whole process, but we are participant in it. We actually had a conscious role that we knew we would be called upon to play. And
mm,
so when we start awakening, the term that people like to use, the awakening, it's
mhm,
we're remembering. It's we're going
mm,
into a space where we start to remember a fuller version of ourself, a more divinized version of ourself, soul
yeah,
based, consciousness based,
yeah,
however you want to say that, and
mm,
that we're bringing that energy and information forward. And this
mm,
the first people I think who were kind of cued or triggered to awaken were to be ready for the time we're in today.
mm,
And because when you look at the planet today, it's pretty chaotic. I mean, there's so many things happening on every level, politically, socially,
mm,
environmentally, you name it. And we
mm,
realize we're in some sort of a collapse. It's like a collapse process.
yeah,
And as that gets tighter and more restrictive and more polar, the
mm,
dualities all come manifesting. We we start to seek harmony. And so we're just at the verge of that in my experience. Like I think we're kind of at a threshold where that's starting to happen in a more profound way. But the way humans will experience that, of course, is an awakening process. They'll get to a point where they realize there's more to life. There's more to the human story. There's more to their personal life. There's
mm.
problems they're living that have solutions if they can only go deep enough to, discover how to find them, and all these
Yeah.
kinds of things. And so I think the important thing, is that spirit is wise. Like, it's kind of had people in, like, ready to
Mm,
start
mm,
the preliminary work to be ready for this time. And then also, I think, coupled with the Cryon information, we realize that there are waves of souls coming in that have a much greater openness. They're not restricted by the same mentality and thought forms. And
mm.
in fact, they're like little systems busters, and they want to create new models of education and political systems
Yes.
and all that stuff, the indigos. And so, and beyond. So these,
Mm,
these humans are being born, but we're all one family. Like, we're all the
mm,
human family. So all these little new beings are coming to create a big change, a very profound change in the nature of life. And the funny
mm,
thing about unity field healing was, because of my background and my orientation towards healing and energy,
mhm,
all this stuff, I just perceived it as a healing process. But what I
mm,
came to realize in doing the work is that it's a divinization process. It's actually the embodiment of the soul. And so
mm.
healing is really a side, whenever healing occurs, it's simply a side effect of that integration. The more we bring in
Yes.
the right resonance, we bring in the right patterns, we bring in the right energy,
Mm,
healing happens in a spontaneous process. But
mm,
bigger than that, it's about becoming the soul. And I
mm,
love the work. I love what you described in your work about mining the Akash, because I think we
mm,
get caught up sometimes in the healing world about fixing things. And like, it's an
mm,
endless stream. It's
mhm,
to heal constantly, one thing
mm.
or another. But there's also this beautiful aspect of who we are that's not just wounds and patterns and,
Yes.
ancestral injuries, and which are all real and true and
Mm,
important to process. But it's not just about that. In fact, that's just a gateway to get
mm,
into a space where we can really let something else come alive that's been held back by those patterns
yeah.
and restricted by those patterns. And
Mm,
so you really start to see the soul emerge and
mm,
flourish.
mm,
And so I love what you described about mining the Akasha, like consciously going
mm,
in and bringing out attributes and potentials and
mm,
possibilities that are in there. I mean, we've all lived umpteen
mm,
number of lives, right, in terms of an incarnational
mm,
experience.
mm,
And there's so many things we've all lived that we can bring forward. And this is the time to do it. And,
mm.
but to get there, we all have to overcome all the resistances within ourselves that would let us do that. And so healing is really more that than
Yeah.
fixing
Yeah.
things. That's how I see it
Yeah.
today.
And I agree with your wording is it's really finding out who we really are at a soul level. And when you you do that, you let go of being a victim, you let go of disease, you let go of a lot of things because it's then you're in the inquiry in the space of, well, why am I here as a soul? What is my journey here? What am I here to do for humanity? So a lot of our wording is releasing and letting go of this um, all the way back to its origins, but also for the greatest good of me and of
Mm,
humanity.
yeah.
Um, because we know that when we raise our own vibration, we're raising the vibration of humanity, and so there's a great power in that. And I love how people say that they found me or found quantum EFT
Mhm.
somehow, and they're not even sure how. They're synchronistically being brought here, or they went to somebody else for regular clinical EFT, and that person has also done quantum EFT, and my practitioners say that once you've done quantum EFT, there's no going back. Once you're in the quantum space and the
Yeah.
soul space, you can't go back to the straight and narrow vanilla clinical EFT. It's very
It's so
hard,
true.
and it's such a different energetic space. And
Yeah.
once they experience that energetic space of the soul, there's no going back.
Mhm. No, that's for sure.
Mm,
No, it's really
mm,
beautiful what you're saying, because the one thing I've one of the many million things I guess I've learned along the way is when people have the opportunity to feel their inner nature, like when people have those energetic experiences, when they feel energy in their body for the first time, when they understand something that has been so opaque to them for a long period of time,
mm,
and they realize that there's a responsibility that goes along with the energy, but it's not kind of responsibility in the way we live it in a 3D world. It's not like you need to find who to blame. And if you're responsible, then you have to blame yourself. It's not that kind of
mm,
an energy. It's an energy of understanding that we're we've been living in duality that's structured this way and has these consequences, if you will. And so we can learn how to unify those energies. And so taking
mm,
responsibility is a pathway to peace. It's a pathway to integration. It's a pathway to overcoming. And so there's a really beautiful sense of autonomy, power, all the beauty that comes along with that kind of an integration that takes place. And it's just magic to see, like, spirit is so wise in the sense that if you
mm,
look around the world, you've been inspired to create your beautiful work, to share it with people who've been inspired all in their own ways by the experiences with the work.
mm,
The same for me, the same for like hundreds of other human beings who are doing really magical things. And
mm,
I'll sometimes say to people, we turn on the news or you pay attention to what's happening in the world, and it's so dark and difficult in lots of ways. But we don't really get to register every day all of the beauty and the love and the magic and the incredible things that are happening in people's lives every day. Like how much love is generated on the surface of the
mm,
earth every single day by human
mhm,
beings doing good things and kind things for one another. It doesn't
mm,
make news, it doesn't make fanfare, but it's happening. And
mm,
when you start to immerse yourself in the space, that becomes your own barometer. It's kind of like what you become attracted to. It's what you want to know
mm,
about. It's what you want to focus on. And you realize there's this beautiful consciousness shift that takes place. It's energetic on one level, it's consciousness on another level. And so the two kind of go hand in hand, and you really start to enter into this beautiful space of being where you realize even the craziness of what's happening is by design. It's a process that has to unfold in order for something new to give birth to itself. And
mm,
it has to be a little chaotic in that way. And that's true in our own personal lives. Like, you mentioned yourself when you first went through your experiences, you ended a relationship, a marriage, these kinds of things.
mhm.
Like the same for me. I went through, when I was going through this awakening, every single thing I knew to be my reality disappeared in the course of
Yeah.
48 hours. My home,
Mhm,
my relationships, the city I was living in. The only thing
mm,
that didn't change was my job at the time. But every single thing that I knew was my reality in that moment ended. And
mm,
so that's daunting. It can be
mm,
overwhelming. It's kind of a crisis of sorts, but it's
mm,
also a new pathway. But we don't always see that in the moment. You realize you might, and I think as we become wiser, we do. but but in the time, it's like, where's this all leading? It just felt like it was all falling apart, like the world was falling apart. And
mhm,
but then the reason it was falling apart is because it was time to restructure and recalibrate and create a different version of reality. And so humanity on a really large scale is going through that right now. Like, and that's
mm,
why so many people are going to begin looking for answers, I think. So
mm.
important to be
Yeah, I
poised and
agree.
ready to help.
Yeah. And it's interesting how synchronicities occur um, that you didn't expect, which could be a synchronicity of tragic events. Or, as I said, when I had my back surgery and I ended up having to lay on my back for 3 weeks at home, and my Reiki master was doing some healing, and I said, I've just read Many Lives, Many Masters again, and I really would like to become a past life regression hypnotherapist. And she said, oh, my sister's just completed a course. So next thing you know, I'm doing this course. Um, and in the process of doing this hypnotherapy course, there was one lady that lived near me. So I ended up picking her up on the way, and we'd have great chats in the car.
Mhm.
And she had learned EFT. And so she introduced me to EFT. You know, none of this was planned by me consciously. It was planned at a soul level. And so as soon as I learned EFT, I was combining EFT with hypnotherapy. The hypnotherapy part sort of slipped away a bit and it was more EFT. And then when I was working with EFT with veterans who had severe PTSD, I was put in touch with Dawson Church in the States, who was doing a lot of the research with EFT and um, veterans. And next thing you know, Dawson's invited me to be a trainer for EFT Universe, which is an American company. And I was the only one invited from the Southern Hemisphere. And
Mm.
so from there, I've been a trainer with EFT Universe since 2010. And it was then my confidence as a trainer and running workshops had me then decide to leave my occupational therapy work. And when I went to a crime event in Mount Shasta, the first time I'd been to the US by myself to do a crime event, I had some magical experiences, ones that people will probably not understand. And I didn't understand because I went through a wall. I was
Mm.
taken through a cone through the wall
Mm.
in my hotel room. Um, and I was shown at some of the sacred sites in Mount Shasta that I had to let go of the old. And so as soon as I got back, I sold my my occupational therapy business. I was a single mum. It was my only income. I was doing EFT and on the side. I let go of my occupational therapy private business and what I trained for 4 years to do. And in that, and people said I was crazy. And then I had to step into quantum EFT, and that's when I'd spoken with Lee synchronistically. I got to drive him to the airport and spent an hour and a half in the car with him. And and he said, "Yep, go for it. I endorse what you're saying you're doing." And that was back in 2013. And I've been running quantum EFT workshops ever since, based on and endorsed by Lee Carroll, who channels Cryon, because I use a lot of the wording and the teachings of Cryon. So yeah, I just love the way that I was led to it.
Mm.
Obviously, at
It's
a,
magical. It's so
a
beautiful, Jenny, what you're
synchronistic
saying.
level.
Yeah,
Mm,
like the synchronicities that unfold, or you realize. I think when I started to have those kinds of synchronicities myself, I realized, people say you're not alone. You're
mm,
not in this by yourself, and there's a beauty to that thought. It's a comforting thought. But when you start experiencing synchronicities, you realize you're certainly not alone, but you're actually part of a plan. And
yes.
so, everything is unfolding in a way to bring you to your true potential. And
Mm,
it's true of everybody as soon as they learn how to live in that environment. Like I
mm,
remember when I first started the day I went to the bookstore, I got up
mm,
that morning and I was sitting at the table and it was this haunting thought. It just kept going over and over. It was bugging me. It was like a thought that wouldn't go away. I didn't recognize it was an intuition. It was just this annoying
mm.
thought, but it kept on hounding me. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go and see what this is all about. And so I had to be pushed a little bit by my soul, but then I surrendered and found myself there. On the
Mm,
same day, after I found this book, I was about to leave the bookstore, and across the room was another bookshelf. And when I looked at the bookshelf as I was going towards the exit door, another book started to glow like it had light
mm.
inside it. And I thought, this is a strange place. I have to get out of here. But I went over to the bookshelf, and this was actually Lee's first book, The End.
Mm,
And
mm,
so I took the book down, and as I'm reading through it, it was a very different language that was used at the beginning. And we were talking
mm,
about an implant and these kinds of things.
mm,
But I'm reading through the book and I thought, this is really important. What's in this book is really important. I know it to be true. And
mm,
so I ended up going back and buying that book and leaving with it. And so I left with those two books in my hand. And
mm,
it was a really powerful beginning because I realized in that one moment, the convergence of things that happened in that one moment were so profound. And then one thing after another led to all kinds of openings and encounters and meeting people and being exposed to things that you wouldn't even
mm,
know to look for. You couldn't find if you tried. You're relying on synchronicities to unfold them
mm.
because you wouldn't even know. Like, why would I start looking for a book on Kundalini awakening, for example? I didn't even know what Kundalini meant. And
Yes.
but yet your soul knows exactly what you need to understand at a
Mm,
juncture, at a point in time. And so you're brought right to what you need every time, over and over. And it doesn't end, it never stops, it just
mm.
continuously unfolds.
Yeah, once you open yourself up to that intention
Yeah.
of, show me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
beautiful,
show me.
isn't it? It's really
Mm,
beautiful.
mm, mm,
And yeah, so it's really, really incredible how that unfolds. But you have to learn to live in that space. And a lot of the spiritual learning that people have to do, I think, at the beginning of their awakening is getting comfortable trusting themselves, trusting that voice
mm,
inside, trusting the intuition, trusting the inner process, being willing to let go of things that are
mm,
holding them in a lower vibration, for all the
mm.
reasons why,
Yeah.
and to let themselves open and flourish and expand in energy and in consciousness at the same time. And
Mm,
so, but when we start living more positive experiences, not just healing experiences or breakdown experiences, it takes on a different kind of a beauty, and
mm,
that's when people get really into it, I guess.
mm. We're
Yeah.
so used to living in our left brain, aren't we?
Mhm.
So much of life around us is very distracting and left brain. And one of the activities that we do in the Quantum EFT workshop is having people practice receiving those downloads and tuning
Okay.
out left brain. And we practice doing readings with each other and getting messages and shutting out the questions that I'm making this up, and really tuning into your own intuition and your guides and higher self. And that is a big part of the work that we do with Quantum EFT. So I love it when people who are very left brain and very nervous before the exercise, like we spend, several hours doing this. And at the end, they're in a totally different space of trust. They're
Yeah.
trusting themselves and their guides and their higher self for the information that's coming through. So I love that.
That's really,
Mm.
really beautiful. Tell me a little bit, like in doing your work, about some experiences that people, I mean, privacy protected, of course, but maybe some things that people have encountered or lived. I'd love to hear.
Yeah, there's a really great story in my first book, Tapping into Past Lives, and people will often say, "Do people need to believe in past lives for this to work?" And I go, "Well, we're not always working with past lives. We are working in time and space, the quantumness of time and space, and looking at, well, what's going on at a soul level and a soul contract level." There was a guy who had abandonment issues and he was doing EFT. We're in a regular EFT workshop, but we often go quantum. And what happened was he'd worked back to his birth and separation and still had all these abandonment issues. So I said, "Do you believe in past lives?" He goes, "No, I'm not a past life kind of guy," was his words. And so I said, "But are you open to releasing this back to its origin, wherever it began?" And he said, "Yes, of course." And so that was the words that I used, but with the intention of what's going on at a soul level and where does this go to. And it went to him being an Aboriginal with the bone being pointed at him, which in Aboriginal terms is you are excommunicated out of the whole community, so sent out to die basically. Everything that you knew is taken away from you, so that's abandonment at its highest level. And it was interesting seeing him going in and out of that experience. So his left brain would kick in and he'd say, "But I'm not a past life kind of guy." And then he'd be crying and in the emotion of, "I'm an Aboriginal. They've sent me out to die." And so you could see this going in and out of the experience of left brain going, "Hang on a minute," and right brain and quantum DNA saying, giving him the emotion of this experience. And so that happens a lot. And even in my clinical EFT, clinical hypnotherapy training, there was a past life lecturer. And I remember, there was a lot of doctors and psychologists and people from all backgrounds doing the clinical hypnotherapy. And he said to the whole room of students, who believes in past lives? Maybe half of them put their hands up. And he said, you are going to have clients that will spontaneously regress into past lives. So you need to know what to do with it, even if you don't believe in it. And so I always say that to my clients and my students, even in clinical EFT workshops. Somebody at some stage will spontaneously go to a past life, and you need to know what to do with it. And the quantum EFT, of course, is looking at the soul experience of it as well, and getting the soul understanding and the higher learning and lessons. So often we will go up and leave the body and up into the highest realms and ask our higher selves and the master beings of light, what's the higher learning and lesson at a soul level for that lifetime? And why was my soul shown that? What is its relevance for me now as a soul in this lifetime? So that we gain the higher learning and lesson from all of that and the soul understanding. And that's the most important part. And then having them give permission. I say, do you give permission to release this pattern and this old belief that was established back there? And then they say yes.
Mhm.
And that is very powerful, releasing it from all pieces and parts of them. And then there's been other ones where they've had interesting experiences. One lady came and was in a regular EFT workshop again. She was afraid to get pregnant and she just kept saying, because what if it's a boy? And she didn't know why. And so we just use those words and ask guides and higher self and our quantum DNA, where does this come from, this fear of having a baby boy? And it went to another life where she had a son, an only son, who was called up to war and he died. And so she made a soul promise never to have a baby boy again that could be taken away in war. And so we released all of that. Within months, she was pregnant with a boy.
Oh, wow. That is beautiful.
Yeah. So there's so many where there've been, death in childbirth. And one particular, I remember I was in Amherst, New Hampshire, and I stayed with a lady who was a clinical EFT practitioner, and her daughter, who was around 20 at the time, had Lyme disease, and for about 5 years she'd been severely debilitated with Lyme disease, hadn't been able to go to college, hadn't been able to go out, basically was at home with the family all the time, and they tried everything, nutrition, EFT, everything. Nothing had helped. And she came to the workshop as well. I worked with her mother, who was very overwhelmed and who really wanted to be a writer, who is now an absolutely brilliant writer. And I'm about to read her third book. But we worked with her mother and worked with all the overwhelm. She was a healer in a past life who had been blamed as a midwife for a mother or baby who had died in childbirth. She wasn't sure. So we released all of that. And in her mining the Akash, she gained her writing skills. And as I said, she's a brilliant writer now. And then her daughter, we did a session with her. And as soon as we started tapping, all of this emotion came out. She said, I was that mother who died in childbirth. And I
Oh,
left
my goodness.
behind two children. And so her DNA was screaming out, don't leave family behind, don't leave family. And so we released all the emotion of it. We got the soul learning and lesson, and we released that. And then we instructed her DNA and thanked her DNA for holding on to that Lyme disease to keep her safe and keep her home with family so she wouldn't have to leave family. And we released all that, and she gave permission for her DNA to release it and let it go, and that it was safe for her to leave family now in this lifetime. And within, well, she had a big sleep straight away after that session because it took a lot of energy.
Mm.
And then before we got back from the workshop, she'd gone out canoeing with her brother, which she'd never done any form of exercise for 5 years. And she was
Wow.
out canoeing for hours, and she never had a trace of Lyme disease ever since that.
Amazing. Amazing.
Yeah. So I love things like that.
Mm.
And we don't have a medical explanation because it was so much deeper than that.
Yeah,
Mm,
definitely. Yeah,
mm,
that's the thing is, I mean, medicine is in working in a holistic environment so often, people, especially when people start to open up to other understandings, energy and healing and, alternative therapies, there's a sense of anger and judgment and all kinds of things that manifest towards traditional healing. But I always say to people, it's perfect for its time. It was the kind of system that was so
mm,
apt and well suited and has brought really incredible discoveries and healing opportunities in different ways. And it's just limited now as consciousness begins to open, and it will transform because of that. We have to be patient with the process, but you know, it will be driven to transform because we're going to understand things in a whole new way. And
mm,
so I always tell people, don't waste that kind of energy. Like don't damage your own well-being by constantly doing that, because it's not to be judged. It's you use it to the value it holds for you, and if it
mm,
doesn't hold value for you, then you leave it behind. But don't
mm,
judge others who use it. And I always say to people, if I was in a motor vehicle accident, I'm not going to start doing energy work. I'm going to go, I'm going to ask them to take me to the nearest trauma center and get everything in my body stabilized, and then I will start working with energy work. But everything has a role and a place. And but
mm,
it's a beautiful testament of how so many of the things that are issues in medicine, the things that people have a hard time healing with in medicine, the chronic conditions, these kinds of things, there's no understanding in medicine because they don't exist in a purely 3D way. They exist in a consciousness pattern. And
yes,
we don't know how to find those consciousness patterns up till now. Like, we didn't even know that they
mm,
existed, first of all, but then how do you access them and begin to release the energy around them and
mm,
let healing flow through that space? But the other
mm,
side of that story is every time people live that, the experience also becomes part of their path. There's a reason why they lived every little bit and piece of it. So,
mm,
you always see people then become healers and, help other people figure out their way through windows and doors that they can't seem to find, their
mm,
way through. And so everything has this beautiful magic of unfoldment, and everything is kind of in a strangely perfect place and perfect time.
mm.
Uh,
I agree.
mm.
And John, how can people find you?
Me. So the easiest way to access my work is on the website. I do a few different things, Jenny. So the unity field healing is kind of the core of the work that I've been doing for many years.
Hmm.
But I do other things. I was in one of these meditations that I had. I was encountered a group of light beings who call themselves the Syrian Blue White Collective, and so I do monthly transmission work with this group. And so that work and the Unity Field work is all housed under one website. So if people go to unityfieldhealing.com, they
Hmm.
will be able to use the tabs at the top to kind of navigate through the site. And there's
Mm,
lots of beautiful healing meditations and teachings and explanations, all kinds of things there for people to just, spend a little time with, explore, learn about themselves in a spiritual way. So there's
mm,
lots there for
mm.
people for free. So
There is. It
go
is,
enjoy.
and I love your website, and I love the way that you have little videos explaining different parts of the website. So yeah, it's a beautiful website, and I love your work. I love your energy, and thank you, John. And I would also like to offer any of your people
Yeah.
um, a discount if they would like to experience quantum EFT work. Um, I have a September workshop coming up.
Okay.
And my quantum EFT is quantumeft.com.au because I'm in Australia, and the .com was already taken. um, but I have a discount as well for my EFT practitioners that I work with through EFT Universe. So I'd like to offer that through any of your people as well, if they would like to have sessions at the discount price and also the workshop at the discount price. And I have a workshop coming up in September. So you don't have to know EFT to do the workshop. To become a certified EFT, a quantum EFT practitioner, you do have done some work with EFT.
Okay,
Mm.
perfect. Oh, that's very gracious, Jenny. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that's great. And do you have a YouTube channel too?
I do. I have a YouTube channel where I post, taken from the monthly transmissions. To explain this, the context a little bit. The transmissions are about 3 hour events. They're done once a month. There's a whole teaching about the integration of the what's called the diamond light body and the activation of the crystalline grid. And so the work that I do in those meditations is really around that integration. And
Mhm.
then, but I always take the last, there's a meditation that's a transmission meditation. That's one part of that whole evening. So people subscribe and, purchase the events, they pay, in other words, to come to the full teaching event. But the meditation, I always make them freely available. And
Mm.
so, because I really want people to have access to the energy, to the internal experiences, I don't want anything to be in the way of that for people. So, and they're all on the YouTube channel. So that's mostly what's on the YouTube channel, plus interviews and different things that I will do. So, all of that is there. It's a Unity Field Healing YouTube channel, but you can also link to it directly through the website. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm.
and all those
That's
meditations are on one page under the Syrian part of the website. So they're all kind
yeah.
of in chronological order. So they're there for
Mm.
people to do if they wish.
Mm. Thank you. And I have my YouTube channel is EFT Australia, which is one word, and there's over 500 videos of EFT and quantum EFT sessions. So these are people who have given permission to have their sessions there. Some of the sessions are linked to both books. The second book is Your Past Life Inheritance, which are transcribed sessions, so word for word of the sessions that I did in 2015 and 2016 when I did 3 month tours of Canada and US, and all these people who have given permission to have the transcribed sessions. But on YouTube, I have all the sessions that people gave permission to have their session up there. So the one that I talked about of Lyme disease and her mother, they're both there. Um, yeah, even ones that one of my most favorite is when we went to Cryon Hot Springs in Arkansas. And there was a lady who had a session right before the Pineal Choir. And she went back to a lifetime on Arcturus, and she was an Arcturian priestess, and her skin was blue. And it was a private quantum EFT and past life regression session in my hotel room. And hers is there in the second book and also on the YouTube channel, and it's called Chandra. But it's beautiful when you see the energy of somebody in a past life, a past planetary experience.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Oh, that's amazing, Jenny. Yeah. And a great way
Mm.
for people to discover the work, I'm sure, because they'll kind of see it
Mm.
in action. So I'll have to go check it out
Mm.
myself.
Mm. And when people tap along, they get borrowed benefits, your mirror neurons, your own
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
When
The,
you're
the
tapping with
coherence
somebody,
of the process. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure.
yeah, somebody who's had grief, somebody who's had sadness, we've all had our own experiences
For
and our
sure.
own
Yeah.
subconscious will find that in us and help release just when you're tapping along to the video. So yeah, that's all out there for anyone who wants it.
Oh, beautiful. That's so beautiful. And
Well,
just
thanks
like
for
on a
our
very
chat.
personal level, I want to say thank you, Jenny, for what you do, because there's so many beautiful souls doing incredible work, bringing light and healing and liberation and spiritual, discovery. And the a lot of it happens in the quiet recesses of life. People that perhaps don't even know it's all taking place. But
Mm.
I just want to take a minute and celebrate you and say thank you, really, from my heart, for everything you bring to the planet. So it's incredible.
Well, thank you, John. And I would like to do the same to you. And thank you from the bottom of my heart for the work that you do. And you've got 500 practitioners out there doing that work already as well. So I celebrate you. I like to think that I could follow in your footsteps someday and have my own practitioner training going at some stage. But I love the work that you're doing, and you're a lighthouse for others doing similar work to follow your footsteps. So thank you so much,
Thank you,
John, and
Jenny.
thanks
Okay.
for our chat today. It's
Yeah, it's
been a
been really fun.